The library is quieter in the mornings. That's why I always choose the early shift. There's something calming about the dust motes dancing in the slanted light and the smell of old pages waking up with the building. It's like the whole place exhales slowly before the world barges in. I don't talk much during those hours. I shelve books, straighten chairs, and water the sad little plant on the windowsill that's somehow still alive. Occasionally someone comes in. A retiree looking for a newspaper. A student in need of silence. Familiar faces who nod and carry their own quiet. That day he wasn't familiar. I noticed the shape of him before the details. Tall, hoodie half-zipped, backpack slung on one shoulder. He stood by the poetry shelf like he had been there before. But I know this town, and I would have remembered him. I waited, pretending to organize the display of recommended reads. He didn't rush. His fingers moved gently across the spines. When he pulled one out, a collection of Mary Oliver, I almost smiled. It wasn't what I expected. He turned slightly, caught my eye, and offered a polite nod. Then he walked over. "Hi," he said. "Do you have more like this?" His voice was calm, with a little gravel in it. He looked directly at me, which made me feel something strange, like I'd been seen through instead of looked at. I took the book from his hands, glanced at the back cover, though I knew it by heart. "We might follow me." He walked behind me, not too close. I could hear the shuffle of his sneakers, the faint rhythm of someone comfortable in his skin. When I stopped by the American poetry section, he gave a soft thanks and crouched to look at the lower shelves. I watched for a moment, then stepped back to my desk. He stayed for almost an hour. Chose 3 books. Didn't rush. When he checked them out, he glanced at the name tag I never remembered to take off. "Mara," he said, testing the name. "Thanks." And then he left. I told myself it was nothing. Just someone passing through. But that night, brushing my teeth, I realized I remembered his name, printed neatly on the checkout slip. Elias Hart. He came back 2 days later. Same time. Different hoodie. He returned one of the books early. Didn't have to, still had 5 days, and said he wanted something else. I asked if he liked the first one. He grinned, a little sheepish. I didn't get past page 10. Not because I didn't like it. I just kept rereading the same lines. I understood that more than I wanted to admit. That time he lingered longer. Picked 2 slim books. At the checkout he looked around the library. "I like this place. It's got..." He paused, searching for a word. "Stillness." He nodded. I didn't trust myself to say anything. Not then. The 3rd time it rained. It was a steady drizzle that made everything smell like wet earth and pavement. He walked in damp, curls of hair stuck to his forehead. He shook out his jacket at the entrance like he belonged there. I offered him a towel we kept near the door, more symbolic than practical. He took it with a grateful half-smile. "Rain makes books feel different," he said, drying his hands. "Like they know they're being read inside while the world's dripping outside." I surprised myself by laughing. Soft, quiet thing. But real. And he looked at me, eyes lit up, and laughed too. That's when it happened. That's when it stirred. It wasn't dramatic. Didn't crash through me. It was just a flicker. A warmth low in my chest. Something fluttering I hadn't felt in. I couldn't even say how long. He stayed near the desk that day. Asked about the library's history. How long I'd worked there. Where the old fireplace used to be before the renovation. He listened the way few people do, not just waiting to speak but hearing. He asked about the photograph behind my desk. Black and white, slightly faded. I told him it was the library's opening day, 1963. My grandmother had worked here. He smiled at that. "That explains it," he said. "Explains what?" I asked. He shrugged. "Why you seem like part of the place." I looked away, heart suddenly louder in my ears. When he left, he didn't borrow any books. Just said, "I'll be back," and gave that small wave people do when they're not sure if it's okay to say goodbye with words. I found myself watching the door long after it had closed. Something had shifted in the air. Barely noticeable, like the first cool breeze that tells you fall is coming. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the way he laughed. The way it had made something lift inside me. I remembered how I used to feel that way. Before. Before what? I don't know. Or maybe I do and just don't want to name it yet. But I do know this. I stood by my bookshelf, pulled down an old poetry volume I hadn't touched in years, and opened it at random. The lines blurred a little, but I kept reading. And in the quiet of my living room, with the rain still tapping at the window, I smiled. Not because of the poem. Because I could still feel the echo of a laugh. And the faintest, softest wings stirring somewhere deep inside. Butterflies. Tuesday mornings are always slower. There's something about them. Less expectation than a Monday, less energy than a Wednesday. I had just unlocked the front door when I saw the shadow move past the frosted glass. I wasn't expecting him, not again so soon. But somehow, part of me had hoped. Elias stepped inside just as I flipped the sign to open. He was holding a coffee cup, steam curling upward, damp around the edges like he'd walked a few blocks in the morning mist. He looked different this time. Not because of his clothes, still jeans, still hoodie, but because he smiled like he meant it. "Morning," he said. His voice was soft, like he knew the place still needed a few more minutes of quiet. "Hi," I said. I didn't mean for it to come out warm, but it did. "You're early." "I wanted to beat the rush," he joked. "Didn't want the poetry section to be overcrowded." I laughed before I could stop myself. I didn't usually laugh that easily. He handed me a coffee. "For you. Hope you like plain." It was still warm in my hands. I didn't say thank you. I just nodded and held it, letting it warm my fingers. Something about it made my throat tighten, like I hadn't been offered something that thoughtful in a long time. He wandered again, not straight to the poetry section this time, but toward the back. Non-fiction essays, a few books no one ever seemed to borrow. I watched him out of the corner of my eye while pretending to log returns. After a while, he sat on the carpet near the bottom shelves, cross-legged, flipping through a book about small towns that had disappeared. I left the desk before I had time to question myself and walked over. "You always read sitting on the floor?" "Yes." He looked up, amused. "Only when the books are this low. You're welcome to join me." I stayed standing. "That one's been on the shelf for years." "I can see why," he said, grinning. "It's a little grim." He closed it gently and placed it back. "But there's something kind of beautiful about it too. All these places that used to be full of people now gone. Like echoes." I nodded, though I wasn't sure why it made my chest ache. "You always work mornings?" he asked. "Mostly." He stood up slowly, brushing invisible dust off his jeans. "I like mornings." "Why?" "They're honest. They don't pretend to be anything else." I didn't know what to say to that. So I looked at the book he had left and picked it up. The cover was faded, corners bent. Forgotten, like a memory someone meant to remember but never did. Later that day he came back. He had left and returned within 2 hours. This time he brought a stack of books from a donation box outside. "These yours?" he asked. I shook my head. "We get them sometimes. People leave them anonymously." He thumbed through one of them, then smiled. "Whoever left these had good taste. You can take one if you want." He looked surprised. "Really? We have more than we can catalog." He pulled out a slim volume of essays and sat on the arm of one of the old reading chairs. I stayed behind the desk but felt the space between us change. It wasn't distance anymore. It was pause. Quiet potential. We talked about the books he read as a kid. I told him about the ones I used to hide under my pillow. He made me laugh again, this time not with a joke, but with a story about trying to impress a girl in middle school by pretending to love Shakespeare. "She saw through me in 2 seconds, he said, grinning. "But she lent me Hamlet anyway." "Did you read it?" "Twice." Still didn't understand it. When he left that day he didn't say goodbye. He just looked at me, eyes a little softer, and said, "I'll return the essay book tomorrow." I stood there for a moment after the door closed, holding the coffee cup from earlier, long since gone cold. I didn't throw it away. That evening I sat on my porch. It had been months since I'd done that. Just sit with a blanket around my legs, a book unopened in my lap, the street quiet around me. There was something in the air. Not a storm. Not quite change. Just a hum beneath things, like something beginning. I found myself wondering about him. Where he lived. If he liked silence at home the way he did at the library. If he always made people feel seen without even trying. I didn't know what it meant, this wondering. But it was there and it didn't feel like nothing. The book stayed unopened. So did the coffee cup, still on my kitchen counter. Still warm in memory. Like a second shelf you never knew was there until someone showed it to you. He didn't come the next morning. It wasn't something I was expecting. I wasn't even sure I was hoping. But when the clock slipped past 9, then 10, then half past, I found myself glancing at the door more than usual. A child and her father came in to look at books about space. An older woman sat near the window knitting, humming tunelessly. I did the things I always do. Rearranged returns, wiped the front desk, straightened the same pile of newsletters. But my hands felt slower. My thoughts somewhere else. By noon, I told myself he had other things to do. Maybe he forgot. Maybe the essay collection hadn't been that interesting. Maybe, and I hated the weight of this thought, I'd imagined the closeness. Maybe it was all in my head. I scolded myself for that. I was too old to feel like a teenager waiting on a message that might not come. Still, at closing time, I found myself setting aside the book he'd borrowed, the one about abandoned towns. Just in case. He came back the next day. There was no grand entrance. No apology. Just the sound of the bell and the gust of cold air that always followed. I looked up. He looked tired. Not disheveled, not unwell. Just a little dimmer. Like something had pulled him inwards. "Hey," he said. "Hi. I meant to come by yesterday. My grandfather had a bad night." He nodded. "Is he okay?" He offered a half shrug. "He's 89. Okay is a spectrum." He held out the essay book. I finished it. The part about longing stuck with me. The idea that we carry absence like a weight, even when it's invisible. I took the book from his hands. His fingers brushed mine for a second too long. Or maybe just long enough. "I thought about what you said," I replied. He raised an eyebrow. "About mornings being honest." He smiled, slow and quiet. "They are. You just have to be willing to listen." We didn't say much that day. He stayed for a little while, sitting by the poetry shelves again, flipping through Neruda this time. I walked past once and he looked up, eyes warm, and said, "You ever read this out loud to anyone?" "No. You should." I didn't ask why. I didn't say anything at all. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I cooked. Not just heated soup or scrambled eggs. I made something real. Roasted vegetables, couscous, a pan sauce I barely remembered how to prepare. I poured a glass of wine and set the table for one. And as I ate, I thought about his question. About reading out loud. About being heard. About what it would feel like to be fully known again and not have to explain anything. The next time he came in, it was already late afternoon. He had snow on his shoulders. The weather had shifted overnight. He stomped his boots and ran his hands through his hair, shaking out the cold. "It's beautiful out there," he said, his breath still visible in the air. "It's freezing," I said. He grinned. Beauty and pain, not mutually exclusive. He stood in the middle of the main room for a while, hands in his pockets, just looking. Not at me. Not at anything specific. Just letting the stillness settle. Eventually he walked over to the desk. "I brought something," he said, and from his backpack he pulled a thermos. "Hot chocolate. I made too much. I didn't know what to do with that." He poured it into a paper cup and slid it toward me. "Too sweet." Took a sip. It was perfect. We stood like that for a while. Him on one side, me on the other. No words. Just the occasional creak of the building and the wind pressing against the windows. Then he asked softly, Can I ask you something? He nodded. Do you ever feel like you stopped letting people in a long time ago and forgot how to start again? I didn't answer. Not right away. He didn't push. But after he left, I wrote the question down on a slip of receipt paper, folded it, tucked it into my coat pocket. That night I lit a candle. I don't know why. I just needed the glow. I sat on the living room floor, back against the sofa, feet tucked under me. I pulled out the poetry book I'd shelved weeks ago, the one I hadn't dared open in years. And I read, loud. Not to anyone. Not really. But maybe to the space he had begun to carve inside me. He didn't come back for 4 days. I didn't ask myself why. I didn't try to guess. I just kept showing up. Kept organizing, shelving, scanning. But there was a soft part of me, new and raw, that missed him. That felt it. On the 5th day, he came in just before closing. His eyes found mine quickly. He looked like he'd been thinking of what to say for hours and had just now forgotten it all. I had to drive to Portland. Emergency with my sister. He nodded. I'm glad you're okay. He smiled, not quite sadness, not quite relief. I thought about this place every day. He sat down near the poetry shelf, pulled out a book, then looked up. Sit with me. I did. On the floor. Just like that. We didn't read. We didn't talk much. But when he offered me half of his chocolate bar, the kind with sea salt and almonds, I took it. And when our knees touched, I didn't pull away. That night before bed, I looked in the mirror longer than usual. Not to check anything. Not to fix anything. Just to see. I whispered, almost like a confession. I missed him. It felt like saying it out loud gave the feeling permission to stay. And maybe to grow. The following week felt quieter than it should have. He came by most days but never stayed long. Sometimes he'd leave a book at the front desk. Sometimes he'd sit in silence for 20 minutes and then leave without a word. The energy between us hadn't gone away. It had shifted, deepened, maybe. But something was pulling at the edge of it. Something neither of us seemed ready to say. I didn't push. I never have. I've learned to wait with dignity. To listen without expecting answers. But that kind of patience, I was starting to realize, could also be a way of hiding. Thursday it rained. Not a drizzle, not a mist, real soaking rain. The kind that makes the world look blurry and old and beautiful. He showed up soaked through, his hood useless, curls plastered to his forehead. He shook out his jacket at the door, not even pretending to be dry. You're going to catch something, I said, stepping out from behind the desk with a towel. I already caught it, he replied with a grin. The rain pulled me in. I handed him the towel and he used it with theatrical effort, rubbing his face, then draping it around his shoulders like a cape. Want some tea? I asked before I could think better of it. He blinked. Sure. We don't usually serve tea. But there's a kettle in the staff room. And a few mugs no one ever touches. I boiled water, dug through a drawer until I found 2 bags of Earl Grey, and brought them out. He sat in the corner reading chair, towel around his shoulders, steaming cup in his hands. He looked oddly regal, like a boy pretending to be a king in a forgotten play. It smells like old books and bergamot in here now, he said. I don't mind. Neither do I. For a while we just sat there. The sound of rain tapping against the windows. The occasional creak from the roof. He didn't look at me much. Just held the cup and stared ahead. Then softly. I used to come to the library to escape. Not this one. Back where I grew up. My mom worked 2 jobs, and the library stayed open late. It became a kind of quiet home. He nodded. I think places hold us sometimes. The right ones. He glanced at me. Do you ever wonder who you'd be if one small thing had been different? I didn't answer. But I knew. I wondered that all the time. When the rain let up, he stood. I should go. Before the streets flood. He returned the mug without looking at me. But at the door he stopped. Looked over his shoulder. Thanks for the tea. And the chair. And the silence. He left before I could say anything back. That night I cleaned the staff room. Not because it needed it. Just because my hands needed something to do. I washed the mugs, dried them carefully, rearranged the drawer with the tea bags. I found myself leaving 2 bags of Earl Grey at the front of the drawer, easy to reach. Just in case. The next morning I opened late. There was a power outage on my street, and I had to wait for it to resolve. When I finally arrived, keys in hand, I found a small package propped against the library door. No note, no name, just a brown paper wrapping and a thin string. I opened it on my desk. Inside was a copy of a book I hadn't seen in years, Letters to a Young Poet, Rainer Maria Rilke. Inside the cover, a single line was underlined in pencil. Live the questions now. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I closed the book gently and placed it on my lap. I didn't need to know who had left it. Already knew. That afternoon he didn't come. And somehow that was okay. Because some things I was starting to understand arrive before we're ready. And they wait. Like rain. Like poems. Like someone who sees you not for who you were or who you should be but just for who you are. Even when you haven't quite figured that out yet. He returned on a Sunday. The library was closed but I was inside cleaning out old records. Sometimes I do that. Go in on quiet days just to be alone with the shelves. There's a kind of comfort in forgotten things. In dusty corners and yellowed paper. I had the radio on low, classical music threading the silence. I didn't hear the knock at first. Then again. When I opened the door, there he was, hands tucked into his coat pockets, eyes apologetic. He looked down, then up. I thought maybe you'd be here. I stepped back, let him in. Said nothing. He walked in slowly, like the space had changed, like he wasn't sure where he fit inside it anymore. I brought something, he said. From inside his coat. He pulled out a small brown paper bag and handed it to me. Inside, garden gloves, seed packets, a folded hand trowel. Lavender, rosemary, white alyssum. You said something once, he murmured. About the garden behind the library. That it used to be something. I thought maybe you'd want to see if anything could still grow. I didn't respond right away. My hands held the bag. My heart held the rest. We went out back. The garden wasn't much. A square of fenced-in earth, dry and weedy, with a few stone planters still holding on. I hadn't touched it in years. It had belonged to someone else, someone I used to be. He crouched first, ran a hand through the dirt. It's not dead, he said. Just sleeping. I watched him for a long moment. Then I pulled on the gloves and knelt beside him. We didn't speak much. The work was slow, pulling roots, loosening soil, clearing debris. At one point our hands brushed. He didn't look at me, but I felt the tension ripple through both of us. The sun was gentle. The air smelled of earth and faint smoke from someone's chimney nearby. I thought of childhood. Thought of silence. I thought of how strange it is to find someone who fits beside you, even in dirt. When we finally sat back, hands dirty, backs aching, he said, "You have a good laugh." I turned to him, surprised. "You don't laugh often," he added. "But when you do, it's like you forget to hold yourself back." I didn't know what to say. So I looked at the garden. "I forgot what that felt like," I whispered. He nodded. "Me too." Before he left, he pressed something into my palm. Slip of paper. Folded once. After he walked away, I opened it. It was a quote. Handwritten in pencil. "The world breaks everyone, and afterward many are strong at the broken places." Hemingway. I held it all evening. I don't know if I believe it. But I wanted to. The next morning he was back. With 2 coffees, mismatched mugs from home. We drank them in the garden, standing in the damp grass, looking over the soft earth we'd turned. He asked what I used to grow. Herbs. Tomatoes. Sometimes flowers I didn't know the names of. He pointed to a bare patch. "That's where the rosemary will go." Smiled. "You planning to stay long enough to see it sprout?" His voice was quieter now. "If you let me." We didn't say anything more. We didn't have to. Sometimes the things that grow quietly are the ones that last. And that morning, with our fingers still dusted in soil, I realized I was no longer just waiting. I was beginning. It's strange how easily people become part of your routines without you noticing. By the second week of spring, Elias had stopped knocking. He would arrive just after opening, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with a new book he wanted to talk about, sometimes with nothing at all, just presence. The garden had begun to green. Not much, but enough to look alive. The rosemary had sprouted. Tiny shoots of lavender fought their way through last year's soil. I found myself reaching for 2 mugs in the morning instead of 1, leaving the back door slightly unlocked. I didn't name what was happening between us. Not out loud. But it lived in the space between our conversations. In the way we passed objects. Books, tools, mugs, with quiet care. In the moments he'd lean just slightly closer than needed. In the way my breath caught when he did. One afternoon, he brought a book he'd found at a thrift store. "Thought of you," he said, sliding it across the desk. It was a field guide to wildflowers of the Pacific Northwest. I opened it, running my fingers over the pages like they were something sacred. "There's a section in the back," he said, "about flowers that only grow after fire." He nodded. "I like that," he added. "That kind of patience. That kind of strength." I couldn't speak. I didn't need to. One Tuesday he didn't show up. By afternoon I told myself he was just busy. But by evening the quiet settled differently. It wasn't just the absence of his voice. It was the stillness he usually filled. I closed the library early. Walked home with my coat wrapped tight around me. Sat on the steps for a long time, watching the wind play in the empty garden. That night I slept poorly. Kept waking. Kept listening for sounds that wouldn't come. In the morning I opened late. He still wasn't there. He came back Thursday. His eyes were tired. His coat wet with rain. "Sorry," he said. "My grandfather passed." I said nothing. I just stepped forward. And for the first time I held him. His head dropped slightly to my shoulder. His breath uneven. My hand rested at the back of his neck, and I felt the full weight of someone who had been holding too much for too long. We stood like that for a long time. When he finally pulled back, he didn't say anything more. He just looked at me like I had offered him something larger than words. And maybe I had. The funeral was small. I didn't go. But I lit a candle the day it happened. Left it burning on the library desk until the sun went down. When he came in the next day, I said only, "The garden missed you." He smiled, weak but real. "Did you water the rosemary?" Every morning. We walked out together. The garden was damp from the storm. New green pushing through. He crouched by the herbs. Brushed his fingers over the soft shoots. Then he turned to me. "I'm staying," he said. "Here. In this town. In this. Whatever this is." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a book. It wasn't one I'd ever seen him borrow. But when he opened it, a note fell out. Picked it up. One line in his handwriting. "Some stories begin long after you think they're over." I folded the note and placed it in my pocket. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. But when we walked back inside, something had changed. Not everything. Not loudly. Just enough. A shift in the spine of something old. The start of a page that didn't need to be turned, because it was already open. And I was already reading.